Hello and welcome. Which American president would be better engaged with the world? Democrat Barack Obama or Republican John McCain? As their campaigns heat up, both of the hopefuls are beginning to unveil their foreign policy plans, and one of the biggest issues emerging for this US election is the war in Iraq. On Tuesday, both senators spoke out on the direction their administration would take, and Barack Obama was very firm.
In the 18 months since the surge began, the strain on our military has increased. Our troops and their families have borne an enormous burden, and American taxpayers have spent another $200 billion in Iraq. That's over $10 billion each month. That is a consequence of our current strategy.
Well, less than an hour later, his Republican opponent scrapped his prepared speech on the economy in favor of one that defended his support of the current surge in the war.
Today we know he was wrong. The surge has succeeded. And because of its success, the next president will inherit a situation in Iraq in which America's enemies are on the run and our soldiers are beginning to come home.
Well, how will a change of leadership in the White House change American foreign policy? Don't forget, we take your calls on this show, and you can reach us at the numbers at the bottom of your screen. Joining the program to discuss the foreign policies of Barack Obama and John McCain, we have from Chicago, Ali Abunimah, a journalist and blogger who has known Barack Obama from before his campaigning days for Senate in Illinois. Here in Washington, D.C., I'm joined by Ivan Eland, Senior Fellow with the Independent Institute. He's also the author of The Empire Has No Clothes. And his forthcoming book, Recarving Rushmore, is due to be published in January of next year. Welcome, both of you. Ali Abunimah, if I could start with you there in Chicago and ask, who is Barack Obama appealing to or trying to appeal to when he makes his foreign policy announcements?
Well, I think he's trying to appeal to everyone. And I think he's trying to send a message to American voters, and particularly to some of the powerful interest groups. He's taken a very pro-Israel line, trying to win the support of the Israel lobby, which is in contrast to his earlier days when he took a much more even-handed approach. I think with respect to Iraq, he is belatedly responding to the 70% of Americans who want to see this war ended. And Americans voted for that in 2006 when they put in a Democratic Congress. And for 2 years, they've seen little or no action in that direction. I think there's a lot of enthusiasm here and around the world that Barack Obama will bring a profound change in American foreign policy. But I think we need to be much more hard-headed in looking at his approach. There may be less change than we bargained for, particularly because he's promising us more war in Afghanistan and Pakistan, which is certainly not a good thing.
Now, Ali, I'd actually ask that because, I mean, it's just widely accepted that Americans in general don't have that much care for foreign policy issues. They're obviously, especially at a time when the US is going through quite a domestic sort of issue crisis with the economy, healthcare and other things, that they don't really care so much about foreign policy.
Well, I think they have to, because as Nobel Prize-winning economists have estimated, these wars, all of the American wars, will cost us, have already cost us close to $1 trillion and will cost us $3 trillion. And that's money that comes directly out of this country's crumbling infrastructure, its failed education system, its declining manufacturing industries. And so a choice has to be made as to whether this country wants to continue to be a global empire with bases in over 100 countries in the world, or a country among many in the world that looks after its own people and has healthy and normal relations with the rest of the world. And I haven't heard Obama really challenging yet the sort of imperial role of the United States, and that's disappointing. He seems to be very cautious, saying, look, we'll try to wind down the war in Iraq, but we will continue the occupation, we will escalate the war in Afghanistan, which is just as much of a failed war as the war in Iraq, and I think is doing just as much harm. But that discussion is not on the agenda. He also hasn't challenged the traditional, unquestioning and really devastating U.S. support for Israel, which has pushed peace much further away.
I'll get onto some of those issues as we progress with the show. Let me ask Ivan Eland here, though, Senior Fellow at the Independent Institute. Was John McCain wise to drop his prepared speech on the economy and respond to Barack Obama? Was it as simple that he basically recognizes the importance of foreign policy, or was it just basically because it's a fight between the two, really, for the White House?
Well, I think it's probably ill-advised because the economy is McCain is very weak on the economy. He regularly gets outpolled by Obama, and that's going to be the major issue. He did that, I think, today because Obama was hitting him on his, he's playing defense in this case because his long suit is national security, and Obama polls lower than he does on national security. So I think he's trying to defend his lead in national security, but at the same time, they rate polling issues, rate Iraq number 3, gas prices number 2, and the economy number 1 in the issue. And the candidate that talks about the domestic economy is probably going to be the one that wins the election.
Well, we're also glad to be joined in this program by John Gizzi, who's the political editor of Human Events magazine. Glad you could join us as well, John.
Thank you for having me, Riz.
Pleasure. Before we get to our caller who's standing by, let me ask you how important you think the war in Iraq is going to be when it comes to actually getting votes. I mean, they've all been talking about it. We heard some sound bites at the beginning. How important is the war in Iraq to U.S. voters?
Absolutely important, because it is what I call the Mideast theater of the war on terror. The war on terror has gone on for a while. As President Bush made clear from the beginning, it is not something that's going to end with a surrender being signed on a ship somewhere. We'll know it when it ends, when we bring in the ringleaders who perpetrated 9/11 as well as other acts of terror around the world. And this is something that is critical in the end and takes precedent over all other issues. With all respect to Ivan, I do not believe that immigration, certainly, or even energy can trump the issue of national security, because if the war on terror is not won, no other issues really matter.
Well, let's bring in a caller. We've got Mohammed on the line from Kenya. Mohammed, good you could join us, sir. What's your question, please?
My question is this, Mr. Riz. First of all, I greet you very well.
Thank you very much.
My question is this: if, for example, Barack Obama became the president of America, is he going to pull out from Afghanistan, as he say in Iraq also? Thank you very much.
Okay, question on Afghanistan. So let's actually hear what Barack Obama has to say on Afghanistan. Here's what he said.
It is unacceptable that almost 7 years after nearly 3,000 Americans were killed on our soil, the terrorists who attacked us on 9/11 are still at large. Osama bin Laden, Ayman Zawahiri, are recording messages to their followers and plotting more terror. The Taliban controls parts of Afghanistan. Al-Qaeda has an expanding base in Pakistan that is probably no farther from their old Afghan sanctuary than a train ride from Washington to Philadelphia. If another attack on our homeland comes, it will likely come from the same region where 9/11 was planned. And yet today, we have 5 times more troops in Iraq than Afghanistan.
Well, let's just, for the record, be clear on how Senator McCain feels about Afghanistan.
It is precisely the success of the surge in Iraq that shows us the way to succeed in Afghanistan. It's by applying the tried and true principles of counterinsurgency used in the surge, which Senator Obama opposed, that we will win in Afghanistan. With the right strategy and the right forces, we can succeed in both Iraq and Afghanistan, and they are not disconnected. Success breeds success. Failure breeds failure. I know how to win wars. I know how to win wars. If I'm elected president, I'll turn around the war in Afghanistan, just as we have turned around the war in Iraq, with a comprehensive strategy for victory.
Ali Abu Nima, if I could ask you there in Chicago, your take on where the two candidates stand, and our caller had asked really whether or not Barack Obama would pull troops out of Afghanistan. Again, how important is that issue when it comes to the average American voter?
Well, I think Afghanistan is quite low on the list, and it's not very much on the radar screen of Americans, and most Americans are not aware of the devastation that people in Afghanistan are experiencing because of this war and occupation, and that's why the Taliban have been resurgent. There's barely a week that goes by without United States or NATO bombing, killing a wedding party. Just last week, yet another Afghan wedding party was bombed, and dozens of people, including the bride, were reported killed. And this is what's driving the insurgency in Afghanistan. So what's missing from this debate? I mean, you hear McCain and Obama there debating, should we have one war or two wars? And I think what the rest of the world is saying is that war is not the answer, that the United States has taken an approach for the past 8 years of shoot first and ask questions later.
Okay.
And even the Bush administration is acknowledging the failure of that by now joining directly negotiations with Iran. And a breaking news report on the front page of The Guardian just a few hours ago says that the United States is actually planning to open a U.S. interest section in Tehran within the next few months.
Okay.
So even the Bush administration is realizing that this approach has failed.
Well, I want to get Ivan Eland here with an email that we got in from a viewer, just put the initials JM here in the USA, and our viewer says, I think Obama has the best strategy for solving the current problems because he is willing to talk to leaders of other countries instead of using a heavy hand and referring to countries as enemies. Now, this is one of the criticisms that America has faced in its flagging image around the world, that it's been a bully, and that perhaps this viewer thinks Obama has a different approach by engaging.
Well, other presidents have negotiated with their enemies. Even Ronald Reagan, the conservative president, negotiated with the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union was about as formidable an enemy as the United States has ever had. And so I think if we can do that in that case, it's a good idea to negotiate with your enemies, or at least hear what they have to say. It doesn't imply weakness. You don't have to agree with them. You don't even have to, reach an agreement. But you should at least hear what they have to say, and you may be able to find some agreement. If you can't, then of course you have to look to other means. But the real question I think that we have to answer is, what are American vital interests? Do we really want to be in two losing wars at the same time? And I do not agree that the surge has put the lid on this in the long term. The surge had very little to do with this. The counterinsurgency strategy that was changed really had to do with it, and that can only be a short-term thing. That this Iraq is a divisive country, and the United States has gone in there and undermined the fabric of the Iraqi society, and there's going to be continued violence in there. I don't think it's done.
Now, John, I know you've got a response. I'm going to wait for that with a great email as well, which I want to put to you straight after this break. So stand by, gentlemen. We have to pause for a moment, but we'll be right back after this.